Hi, this is a compilation of all of the shorts that made up the Mud and Blood tier list. A separate video of me talking about Mud and Blood is coming after this. Also, there's going to be a series of shorts about a completely different game. Okay, enjoy. The French, the weakest soldier you can send into battle. Their only saving grace is that they are the cheapest soldier you can get. 75% of the health of a regular American soldier. Roughly 1/3 of the skill and will desert at the slightest inconvenience. These guys were designed to be weak. You lose the battle when your squad is wiped out. So if you are desperate for any sort of reinforcement, send out one French guy to stand in the field. By a technicality, your squad is barely alive, which extends the game by a few seconds. Does this unit have any other use case? No, not really. There is a ribbon you can earn if you manage the impossible task of getting a Frenchman to the rank of lieutenant. It will permanently increase the health of the entirety of France by 25 points. This is not worth the impossible quest. D tier. The regular soldier, your rank and file. You usually start out with 4 of these guys if you're below the rank of major. These men set the average, but average isn't good enough. If you didn't start with 4 of them as your default, these soldiers would be barely used. You could spend the same amount of points on a more specialized unit to work towards a certain setup, or just save up a little bit more to have a different type of soldier that is far better in a fight. Even in the case of emergencies, where your squad has been mostly wiped out, 3 Frenchmen are likely better than a single soldier, as they would distract the enemy for a little bit longer. In short, mid, C tier. The Fresh from the Academy Officer Unit, a former frat boy that unlocks 1.5 menus worth of options. Other than him being really good in melee, this guy has basically no combat usage whatsoever, but he is required if you want to be able to use most of the command options and a good chunk of the air support. This makes him an always decent option and crucial in a bunch of strategies, even if he just sits in the back for most of them. His tiering is entirely dependent on how good the command orders and air support are. Most of them are pretty decent, and all of them have niches to fill. You will likely use at least some of them during any run. If you manage to promote 5 fuel units up to an officer rank across your games, you get a ribbon that gives you a free officer whenever you start a run. It's relatively easy to obtain, and the payoff is one of the best in the game. Hey dude. The Signaler, aka Phone Guy. Because of the giant radio on his back, he is the slowest moving unit in Mud and Blood. You will need him to access any of the air support options. The Signaler might as well not have a weapon, as his main job is to just talk on the phone. Phone Guy will likely need a couple of buildings set up around him to function well enough to be decent, which will also require an engineer, costing a fair number of points to get everything prepared. Air support itself is fairly strong, but a missile has the problem of not being recyclable. At times, they can be quite inaccurate. That was my own bunker. There are a couple of ribbons that may give you a very low chance to have a plane fly by free of charge, but you can't rely on those. B tier. The Medic, the non-German one, the definition and poster child of a support unit, technically has a weapon on hand, but I guess he's a pacifist because he will never use it. It's more likely because units that can fight will occasionally stop moving completely and fire their weapons, which would be quite annoying on the Medic. He does exactly what you expect and heals any injured infantry unit. The Medic is somehow tied with the Jeep as the fastest unit, making him a prime crate collector. And he likely has some good legs on him. 60% of supply crates seem to land next to the enemy, so this is a good secondary use case. Healing is always decent, and it's fairly cheap at 3 points, but there are long periods of time where the medic is completely inactive, and while healing is always good to have, it's never a super high priority. B tier. The Engineer, the most overworked person you will have on your squad. If you knew anybody that was doing or did an engineering degree, they will confirm that this is realistic. If a business major, aka an officer unit, as much as looked at the workload of an engineering major, it will be like giving a Carolina Reaper to a Victorian child. The more you play Mud and Blood, the more you realize how crucial buildings are to surviving later waves. Pretty much every single building needs an engineer. They can range from basically required for survival, like trenches or bunkers, to good niche fillers, like cam nets, pillboxes, or site blockers, to surprisingly good one-off things like mines and TNT. Every building has its usages, and most are well worth the cost. The engineer is also no slouch when it comes to fighting. Also, a ribbon can sometimes give you a free building. All around, likely the best unit in the game. S tier. the flamethrower. He's the completely insane person that every friend group has. Fun fact, did you know that some firefighters completely swear off of eating pork? Not for religious reasons, it just so happens that a house fire roasted person smells very similar to cooked pork. Have you ever heard of the term long pig? Using a flamethrower can lead to some of the most enjoyable moments Mud and Blood has to offer. Is the unit any good? God no. It's arguably one of the weakest, basically unusable past the early game, and is the only unit that has a limited range. By all means, it's a waste of 3 points. But is it fun? Oh yeah. Fun fact 2, if you house fire roast someone for too long, the meat can just detach from the bone in a consistency that's not too different from pulled pork. D tier. The Bazooka Boy, your squad's drunk fat bro. The weakest anti-vehicle option you can have. He will miss 90% of his shots. 9% of the shots will be grazes that will barely do any damage. But when that 1% hits, it will be glorious for a good 3 seconds. He's called an anti-tank unit, but a Bazooka Boy will do nothing to a tank. Those things can shrug off small explosives like nothing. This unit's niche is not dealing with the armored beast. His niche is dealing with smaller vehicles that are heavily resistant to rifle fire. That being said, enough rifle fire can just take out small vehicles with little issue, and grenades are just cheaper. Bazooka Boys aren't completely useless, just mostly useless. See ya. The crew member. His favorite pastime is procrastination. If one of your vehicles has a soldier taken out by a stray explosive, you will need to hire a temp worker, basically required if you want to maintain the power of your vehicles. This man has the most stereotypical ADHD possible. He is distracted so easily. Him having a weapon slows him down immensely. He seems to heavily prefer using his useless pea shooter instead of moving towards the unmanned Godslayer 5000. I swear, he stops his movements the most out of any unit. We need you to make the skies rain metal. Stop taking pot shots at the bodies. I would put him lower, but he's mandatory if your strategies revolve around vehicle units. C tier. The boys in berets. The Spec Ops is a Charmeleon to the regular soldier's Charmander. They start with a better loadout and on average has far higher rifle skill and morale. He also cannot run away from a battle. A singular Spec Op can easily solo his way to wave 25. 2 Spec Ops supported by a trench can make their way to wave 50 more often than not. Main downside of these guys is that the beret seems to have a taunt aura. The Germans will often aim for the red beret even if some targets are further up in the field. This makes it more difficult for Spec Ops past wave 50, as that's the point where enemy rifle skills have scaled up enough that they have a slightly decent chance to actually hit something. Spec Ops are some of the most reliable units. A tier. The Scout, the second fastest kid in elementary school. The Medic is faster for no real reason whatsoever. He's the only non-vehicle unit that can move and attack. Surprisingly, this is only a minor perk. It's useful to move and fire, but this game is defensive by nature. The Scout starts with a slightly better weapon, but a Scout's average skill and morale is roughly the same. Having a Scout on your team gives you a visual timer as to when the next wave is coming. A minor but nice thing to have. He can also spot stealthed enemies from slightly farther away. That's useful sometimes. You may have noticed a pattern. The Scout has a lot of perks, but all of them are slight benefits or a bit niche. This would be fine, but he's a 6-point expense. You can get units far stronger for the same amount or less. He doesn't really have downsides, he's just a bit overpriced. B tier. The heavy weapons guy, basically the strongest ballistic unit you can have when in a bunker, can wipe out 20 men in 7 seconds if he's in a bunker. He can carry your squad to wave 100 consistently when inside a bunker and trench. Yeah, this unit is heavily reliant on the bunker. Explosives are almost completely nothing when inside a bunker. Defense against explosives is your main priority past wave 75 or so. The units inside attack slower in exchange exchange. This guy is the only soldier that attacks faster in a bunker. This combination is the strongest thing in the game. Wave 100 will be reached the majority of the time. You're still going to need some luck to reach the coveted wave 150, but that usually comes with time. The guy by himself would be B tier, but still though, this setup is the game's meta, and he is the main attacker. S tier. Sniper, the quiet kid that you are occasionally nice to. These are the most accurate soldiers, and they have the ability to go invisible when not attacking. This means that they have a good chance to one-shot most enemy foot soldiers and draw far less aggro than most units. The sniper is the only unit that can see and attack invisible enemies while they are invisible. 1 or 2 snipers have a fair chance to just carry you to wave 50. After that, they kinda fall off a bit. They of course can't deal with armored vehicles, but that applies to most units, so that's not really a downside. The sniper just has a rather slow rate of fire, and explosives don't really care if they can't see you. It's quite difficult for the sniper to deal with larger groups of Germans, although he is still quite useful for higher priority targets. A tier. A car. Dude, Dad will be pissed if you crash this. A very basic vehicle unit. The 50 cal rifle attached to this Humvee is tied with the sniper rifle as the highest damage weapon in the game. Too bad it's also the slowest weapon. The Jeep seems to attack like 3 times per wave. I think I've only ever had like 1 active Jeep in all of my runs. Well, at the very least, it's useful as a distraction. I say that sincerely. Units further up on the field get more aggro, and a Jeep being mostly immune from rifle fire makes it technically invincible during the early rounds, while being one of the cheaper vehicles. If you have extra points, a distraction unit like the Jeep is better than you may think. Also, if the Jeep actually attacks, he's fine, beat you. The mortar guy, an overpriced tourist trap of a unit based around pelting the Germans with small explosives, fires a lot more often and is more accurate than the bazooka, but he's double the cost at 8 points. The mortar is good at crowd control and can really slow down the enemy's advances while constantly chipping them, but costing 8 points makes him the second most expensive infantry unit. He also doesn't really qualify as a main DPS. He's an expensive secondary damage dealer. I mean, he is pretty good at dealing with small vehicles at least. There are setups with mortar pits where you can get a constant stream of high intensity fireworks to land on the Germans. This is fun, but this is just a AAA cannon with extra steps. Honestly, he is a decent unit, but 8 points feels like I'm being charged for a delivery fee and a service fee. Video. The tank, a childhood favorite, tied with the anti-air cannon and Land Mattress for most expensive base cost at 20 points. Immune to all rifle fire, highest base HP in the game, and unlike the smaller vehicles, light explosives won't just randomly take out a crew member. In exchange, the main cannon is not very good at taking care of groups. Tanks can easily be overwhelmed if nothing supports them. The cannon is slow to fire, and all large explosives are inaccurate by default. Even if you upgrade it with a 50 cal rifle, tanks need ground soldiers as support. Its main job is to take care of the bigger stuff and act as a steel wall, although sometimes the 1k HP doesn't really matter because a direct hit from artillery deals 9999 damage. It's very strong and can slay guards when supported right, but for 20 points, it's surprisingly mid. B tier. The paratroopers. Where are we dropping, guys? I have never played Fortnite. Tied with Sarge as the most expensive infantry option. At 12 points, you can call in 4 elite troopers from a plane for a round of PUBG. Most paratroopers start with better weapons than the standard Springfield rifle. Average skill and morale are higher than the soldier but lower than the Spec Ops. These guys commonly land slightly injured and sometimes won't even survive the drop. Requires an officer and signaler to even summon in the first place, which is honestly their biggest downside. Mud and Blood has a soft unit cap of 6. Once soldier number 7 arrives on the field, the Germans will immediately start sending planes and artillery in your general direction. Paratroopers are quite strong, but taking up 4 unit slots is quite a lot to ask for. Man, I just don't like dealing with planes. B tier. the anti-air artillery, one of the 3 most expensive units in this game, and likely the strongest of the 3. Plane takedowns are going to be a small percentage of the AAA's resume. This thing can tear through infantry and small vehicles. It's arguably the strongest offensive unit in the game, easily the best early game carry, but also a bit of a noob trap. You can get to wave 60 to 80 quite consistently, but wave 100 is going to require a good amount of luck, and wave 150 is a pipe dream. Tanks and blitz waves become more common later on, and the AAA cannon just doesn't deal with them that well. Tanks can shrug off small explosives, and despite the AAA being very expensive, it's the second most fragile vehicle you can get. An unlucky early stray can also just completely ruin a run. Undeniably strong, but you will need something else if you want to get past wave 100 consistently. A tier. The AT cannon, the definition of all bark no bite, looks like it would be insanely strong. The attacks are super flashy, but this thing likely won't do anything. The AT cannon will attack frequently enough, but it'll only hit like 5% of its shots at best. You'll be surprised how little those giant explosions actually seem to do. There's also the issue of friendly fire. The AT cannon isn't even the biggest offender of this. It's so inaccurate it can't even hit things by accident, but the chance is always there. And unlike the other vehicles with high load weapons, it doesn't have good enough offensive abilities to offset the risk. I mean, it can still be used as a distraction. It gets better in later waves when more enemies group up, and the tank this thing is supposed to be an anti towards actually arrives. It's not good, but it's not useless. C tier. The 50 cal stationary, the dumbest person in a group of smart people. Very similar to units like the sniper, Spec Ops, or bunker guy, in that it has a good potential to carry and be your ace on the field, but the 50 cal is also very clearly the weakest of that group. All of the other ones just kind of have things that make them better, while the 50 cal has a mixed bag of benefits. Being a vehicle means a high resistance to rifle fire and a lack of a morale stat, meaning the 50 cal rifle can't be pinned and won't retreat. In exchange, a random stray can just disable the weapon. Stationary units are vulnerable by default, and weirdly enough, the average weapon skill of vehicles is far lower than the average skill of flesh units. Granted, the 50 cal has the highest average of all vehicles, but that's still only around the level of the standard soldier. B tier. The mechanic, a unit equivalent of a sub-niche of an already niche hobby. This guy is a medic but for vehicles, which means he's not going to be used that much. Vehicles don't need healing as much as infantry units. Steel tends to have higher defense than flesh. Vehicles have higher base health, ranging from 2 times to 10 times, and are either heavily resistant or outright immune to rifle fire. The only thing the mechanic is going to be healing is chip damage from small explosives. He also doesn't have the medic's running speed, so he can't even perform as a secondary crate collector. Yeah, he's just too niche. D tier. The half truck. I'm going to say this right now. There's going to be a bit of bias as this is my favorite unit. This thing is the true most expensive unit. Base cost is 12 points, but it has a bunch of different upgrades that at minimum cost 10 points. The branching truck types are the main appeal, listed from worst to best. The medical truck. Why would you pay 22 points for a tankier medic? The HQ truck. Some niche support usages, but the offense-based ones are better. The anti-tank truck. It's basically just a tank now, but it does seem to attack a bit more often. The mortar truck, a very strong secondary DPS. The quad machine truck, the strongest DPS unit in the game. This thing is just too useful to pass up. It really should be like top of A tier, but it's my favorite. S tier. Sarge, the required by law platoon gigachad. If the baseline soldiers are Charmanders and the Spec Ops Charmeleons, then Sarge is a Mega Charizard X. He is far and above the strongest infantry unit. It's not just direct combat. He has a mix of rallying effects if other soldiers stand within a certain radius of him. He can unpin units. He gives EXP to inexperienced officers, and he can raise the morale stat of soldiers if it's below 20. He himself is not just strong, strong, he makes everyone else around him stronger. His only downside is that if he goes down, the entire squad might just leave. Losing high-ranked units will plummet the morale stat depending on the rank that was lost. Losing a crucial unit will often lead to the collapse of any squad. But for a squad based around Sarge, the collapse is particularly fast. Still, he's very strong. A tier. The Land Mattress. Have you ever wanted to aim a variety pack of fireworks at people? If yes, this is perfect for you. This thing fires 16 high explosives in the general direction of the Germans, usually destroying any large armored enemies, and gives any survivors the novel feeling of a truly primal version of fear. If you want to survive long in Mud and Blood, most of the time you need two things: something to take care of foot soldiers and something to take care of metal boxes. Things that can body foot soldiers usually can't deal with vehicles and vice versa. The Land Mattress is the one unit that can kind of maybe deal with both. Also, this thing just makes you feel diabolical, expensive and could be a dud, but has unmatched raw strength. A tier.